Could you give me an overview and tell me what you and your colleagues were looking to determine?
Yes, we were really interested in our very youngest children, and infants and toddlers, and particularly infants and toddlers who were from families that had some struggles or that were living in poverty, and really the kinds of experiences that they had, and in particular ways in which parents and their children interact in order to really support their language development.
How did you go about looking at this particular group?
Well, we were really fortunate. This particular group of parents and children were all eligible for early Head Start back in the late 1990s when the program began, and I was part of an original Early Head Start Evaluation Consortium, and the larger project, which involved many more children and families at 17 sites, was really developed and funded to examine the impact of early Head Start. So we were lucky. We were working with a program here in New England, and this was one of the 17 local early Head Start programs, and we were very interested in knowing more about those particular parents and their infants and toddlers, and a little bit about how children learn and what parents, in the context of their parenting, do to promote those children learning, in particular language development. And I've been particularly interested to try to answer a question: is it helpful for children if they want to learn vocabulary? Is it just giving them vocabulary words that a parent needs to do? Or are there other things? Do parents need to consider their interactions with that child in a social, emotional dimension as well? And so that's one of the things we really wanted to look at here. What was more important as infants and toddlers learned vocabulary, and did the social, emotional interaction that parents had, or the parental sensitivity that parents expressed in interacting with their infants and toddlers, make a difference to vocabulary development? And did their, what we call cognitive teaching, did they actually teaching interactions with their children make a difference?
How did you look at all of that?
We did a couple of things. We were fortunate to use a number of the measures that were being used in the Early Head Start study. And one wonderful part of that study was that we actually were invited into these families' homes, and we asked parents a lot of questions, and we watched the children and measured their vocabulary development over time. But we also were able to videotape parents in interaction with their children and use those observations to code things like how sensitive were parents, what was their warmth look like as they interacted with their children, how sensitive were they to their children's cues, and also what did they do around teaching their children as they had a set of toys to play with their children.
Could you tell me how many sets of parents and children, and over what period of time?
This was a set of 146 parents and children, and we followed them from the time that they described an interest in early Head Start. Some of them were recruited, so some of them came in when they were pregnant, through the child's first birthday, so anytime. So we first encountered them sometime between when mom was usually in her third trimester up to the child being a year of age. And then we saw them again when all the children were 14 months of age, and then 24 months of age, and then when they were 36 months of age.
What did you and your colleagues find?
What we found was actually really quite interesting, that early on when these children were babies, that the parents' sensitivity to the child's cues, their warmth, their ability to read the baby's cues, their responsiveness, was quite important in the child's very early understanding of language and their ultimate development of vocabulary at age 3. And we actually mapped it across from 1 to 3, so we looked at how it changed. And we really found that the most important parenting contribution to the child's development of language was parental sensitivity. However, that wasn't the whole story, because as the children got older, as they really entered toddlerhood, their first and the end of their first to second to third years, that the way in which the parent interacted with the child to help teach them, doing things like pointing to, what's that, or, that's a dog, or the cow says moo, or, just that's a chair. Those kinds of teaching activities around words became increasingly important. So those were much more important when the child was 1.5, 2, up to 3, than it was for babies. And but the sensitivity that the parent really engaged in with the child didn't diminish as the teaching went up. So if sensitivity really remained kind of way up there, and as a child got older, the parent became more and more proficient at really teaching the child, that combination really promoted the best vocabulary development, the best learning in the child. And we were surprised and interested and pleased to really see that it really was the foundation that parents really put down with their babies and their toddlers around their sensitivity to, what's the child asking for now? Are they fussy? Are they active? Are they ready to attend? That kind of sensitivity was very important, not just to the child's social emotional development, but to development in what we call a different developmental domain, language. But their teaching ability was also really critical with some of the things that we think of that are more typically the things that we suggest to parents. Point things out to your child, help teach them about the world. But if you do that with sensitivity, as a parent, you're in the very best place to help your child learn language.
What is the sensitivity? Is it paying attention to their cues, perhaps, or is it more?
I think it's paying attention to their cues and responding in a way that's responsive to their cues, rather than trying to sometimes direct the exchange. For example, I may be reading a book with my 1-year-old. I actually did it with my 1-year-old grandson not too long ago, and he was very interested in one of the pictures of a giraffe on the page. And I was reading the book, and it was talking about a duck and a giraffe, and for a while I was kind of trying to get him to pay attention to the duck, but then I really, went with, he's really interested in this giraffe, and he's interested in touching the book and doing other things. So I went with what he wanted to do and pointed out things in that context. But most importantly, he managed the interaction. And in that way, instead of getting into a struggle, it was more about being sensitive to kind of go where the child wants to go, again, within safety limits, or the time that you have, to really help them learn.
What do these findings suggest?
I think a couple of things, that it's really about both how we love and care and are attentive to our children around where they're going and what they're doing, as well as trying to do teaching that really, that whole picture will help us be better parents and grandparents. But the other real message for me is that it's really important to look across what we call developmental domains. I mean, at one point in time we said, if you want to learn language, you want to, particularly for very young children, it's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, learn these 4 vocab. Make sure you teach your child that's a dog, and that's a pig, and that's a person, and that may be less important than helping them explore the world with a sensitive, warm, caring person with them. And they're learning social emotional skills as well as language skills together instead of separately.
The findings don't suggest a direct link between that stimulating behavior and higher vocabulary.
There is. Matter of fact, and it's independent. In other words, there's a direct link between the stimulating behavior and vocabulary, and there's a direct link between the parental sensitivity and vocabulary. And it's really the two together that optimize the child's learning around vocabulary. But it's not that they really interact with each other. In other words, they each have their own independent value to contributing to the child's ability to learn language.
What would you suggest for parents? What kinds of tips or behaviors or takeaways could you suggest for them?
Well, I think so many parents these days are really concerned about helping their children learn, and they want them to learn at a very young age. And they get very worried about, has my child reaching this milestone? And so consequently, sometimes parents are really focused on, I have to get them to learn these 4 things. And I would suggest to parents, relax. Go with what your child wants to do and use the world as their learning environment. So maybe they're not interested in, what the cow looks like in a certain book right now, but they may be really interested in your water bottle or your glass or your car keys or car fob these days. And so help them explore and name objects for them where they are and where they go, and take advantage. And also, this is not my work, but a number of other very thoughtful folks who say, and really talk to them about what you see them doing all the time, which is part of that sensitivity. Oh, you're turning the pages of the book. Oh, you're throwing the book down, rather than, oh, we have to read this book, so don't throw it down. It's more about describing what the child's doing with some sensitivity and caring and love for them.
Your specific area of social science?
I'm actually a counseling and consulting psychologist with a developmental piece in there, and I'm also a psych mental health nurse practitioner. So I'm both a clinician and a researcher.
Wow. If you could tell me where you got your undergraduate degree, your master's,
Sure.
your advanced
I have an
degree.
undergraduate degree from Duke University, actually in nursing, and a graduate degree from Emory University in psych mental health nursing, and then I have a counseling consulting psychology master's and doctorate from Harvard.